Hello everybody, welcome to episode 3. My name's Coding with Court, and today we're going to be talking about how to connect our mean stack application. And by our stack, I'm just talking about our Angular application, Mabel, which is our server, and Express, and last but not least, our Mongo database that we're hosting with the Atlas. Okay, so just quick overview of what we'll be doing today. So the first thing we're going to start off with is connecting our Express server with our Angular application, and we're going to be doing this with HTTP requests. Secondly, the cluster that we created on Atlas, which is just the cloud service that holds our Mongo database, we're going to connect that with our Express server. I mentioned previously that we're going to cover authentication. So we're going to start off by creating our user collection. And last but not least, we're going to do CRUD operations for our user collection. If you're not familiar with what CRUD is, that just stands for create, read, update, and delete. And when it comes to the HTTP methods, create is post, read is get, update is put, and delete is just delete. But we'll cover these in more detail as we go along with the video. But as I mentioned before, this is just an overview, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so as usual, we're going to want to go ahead and start our application. So that'll be ng-serve, and so when I run npm run start, it's going to run this script here. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for our server. I believe I already have that set up. Nope. So let's go ahead and create this start script. Okay. So for our start script, it would be Node server.js. Start being for production, but for development, I'm going to be doing nodemon. And by the way, you can name these whatever you want to. I'm just naming mine start and dev. So in here, if I run npm run dev, it goes ahead and executes that script. So let's go ahead and double check to see if everything's running. So localhost 4200. Yep, that all looks great to me. And let's go ahead and check out localhost 3000. Yep, everything seems to be working the way it should, which is great. Okay, so we need to connect these two together. And as I mentioned in our overview, I said we were going to do that through HTTP requests. So we're going to start getting into the command line for Angular, also known as the Angular CLI, which you can see Angular already installs it for us. And you can notice that it's a dev dependency because production does not need this package here. Okay, so if you're not familiar with services, that's what we're going to be starting with today. Now in Angular, you're normally dealing with components, modules, or services. And Angular kind of follows a MVC architecture, which stands for Model View Controller. In Angular's case, model is the HTML. So like if I'm looking over here, so the model would be app.component.html, which is what you see on the screen. Oh, I apologize. I'm backwards on that. So the HTML would be the view. The model would be kind of like what data is coming in. So like if I have like just an example. Like let's say I have that user I was talking about creating later on. So I have a user and they have a name, which is a string, and then they have an ID, which is a number, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the model, right? And the controller would be the component because the component is what's controlling what's going to be seen on this page if we do like ng-fors or ng-ifs and things like that. So this is a very basic overview of that. But the service is what we use in Angular to communicate with different API endpoints. And the nice thing about services is they persist throughout the website as long as the user doesn't close the tab. But what we're going to do is we're going to use ng-generate, and if I show help for this, you can see a service is on here and a bunch of other things too. And we'll go ahead and let's generate our first service. And so ng generates service. Now we put the name. So I'm going to create a new folder. That's why I'm putting services / and let's go ahead and just call this user, since I'm going to be creating that user collection. Normally this is kind of like how I like to do my services. I base them off of what collection or SQL table that I'm going off of. So here is our first service, and we're going to need to do a couple things here. So in the constructor we're going to inject some data. I'm going to have HTTP, and this should be HTTP. I'm sorry guys, I'm trying to remember which one it is. Give me 1 second. Okay, so it's HTTP client. Oh. Okay, so we need to use HTTP to connect the server to our Angular application. So the first thing we need to do is we need to come into app.module, and we just created this user service, so we need to tell Angular that it's a provider. So let's go ahead and import that in app.module. But we also need to import HTTP client module. And that should be in, so let's go ahead and stick with single quotes. So at Angular, I believe it's common HTTP. So it's HTTP client module. Okay. Let's go ahead and save that. Everything's compiling correctly, which is great. Now back in here, in this constructor, this is where we're going to create our HTTP variable that we'll use to make requests. So it'll be HTTP client. Awesome. So for now, let's just create a test function. Now this is going to return an observable. We'll just say type any. So to make these HTTP requests, we use observables. And if you're not sure what RxJS is, it's basically a library that we can use to make asynchronous calls and handle events and things like that. So since we're communicating with our server, we don't necessarily know when the request will come back, which is why we're returning an observable so we can listen to that. Now I mentioned previously with those CRUD operations for creating, we'll use post, reading, get, updating, put, and then also delete for deleting a record from our collection. But we're just going to start with something simple here. So let's see. Let's look at some of the routes that we already have here. So we have /API, which will return a string called, which says hello from Mabel. So let's go ahead and go there. Now, one thing I forgot to do is in our environments here. Now, keep in mind when we were working with Mabel, our Express server, we have this .env here, which is going to host, which is going to have some variables that our application will need to run smoothly. And so it's kind of the same thing with Angular, just that this is connected to our GitHub, so we don't want to put anything too secretive in here like API keys or things like that if we don't want to share them. But when Angular is running, when I build Angular and it's not in production, it'll use environment.ts. But when I do ng build prod, it'll use this one instead. So in here, our server, well, I don't know if I really like that name. Let's leave it for now. But our server URL is at localhost 3000. Okay. And this is only for development. So in here, let's go ahead and get those environment variables. And I believe I can do that by just let's see. Don't know if that's right. Let's try it out. Doesn't seem right to me. So we'll do import from just environment. So environment dot, yep, okay. So our server URL and it's /API, and we want to return this. So, and also, I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with TypeScript, but this is just I'm creating a function here called test, and I'm saying that the return type is going to be observable any. So if I save this, everything compiles properly. So let's go ahead and try to use this service to see if it's working properly. So let's go ahead and import this. So private, it's going to be user service. Okay, that all looks good. And so let's go ahead and try to call our server now. And the way we do that is we say this.userService, and you call whichever function you want to. So in my case is test.subscribe. So in RxJS, all this subscribe is I'm subscribing to this event here. So the way I think about this is observables are events. So inside of this subscribe, we have two callback two callback functions that are used. So we have one that are for errors, and we have one that are for successful returns. So if everything works correctly, we should see that string console.log here. However, if we have any errors, we'll also see that here. But only one of these callback functions will be called. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you look at this, there's only one problem that I have with this, and that's that this subscription isn't being closed. It'll always be open. And in our case, this isn't really a problem because this route only returns a string. It's not doing anything too complicated. It's not returning tons of data or things like that. But if you don't close your subscriptions, you'll have memory leaks, and they will affect the performance of your website. So every time you subscribe to an observable, you need to close them. So normally the way I close them is I use something called take. And what take is it's a RxJS function. So let's go ahead and import that here. So RxJS operators take. I don't think that's right. Okay. So what take does is it'll only take one callback from this event. Now another way we could do this is, let's say if I do this again, so I can assign this to a variable called subscription, and we go ahead and do the same thing here, subscribe. Now what I can do later is, and this is kind of off topic, but it's really important to make sure that you keep these closed. But Angular has life cycles with components. There's quite a few of these life cycles, but we're going to implement one called ng-on-destroy. And so ng-on-destroy is called whenever the component is going to be collected by basically the garbage disposal with Angular. So whenever a component has lived its life and is going to be taken out of memory, that's when onDestroy is called. And so I'm going to create a variable up here called subscriptions, and it's going to be an array of subscriptions. And this did not get imported. So instead of doing this constant here, I would do something like this dot subscriptions dot push, and I would push the subscription here. So again, there's two different ways to do this. I prefer this method, but whenever you're going to have a lot of subscriptions, this can get kind of tedious. So it just depends on what the situation is and what your preference is. But I would do a push here, just like this. So I'm just pushing this subscription onto this subscription array. Now, again, I need my callback function. So res is just response shortened. So let's go ahead and console.log that. And let's also go in here and get that error callback function. Let's call that here. Whoops. Again, I seem to use array brackets instead of curly braces for some reason. Anyways, so in here on the ng-on-destroy, now looking at this again, you can see that I'm not closing this, so we need to do that. So the way I can do this is this dot subscriptions dot for each. So I'm going to loop through every subscription in here. So I'm going to do another callback function. I'll call this subscription. Okay. So then in here I can say subscription dot unsubscribe. So this will close all memory leaks. But that's only if I push that subscription onto this array, or if I have something like this. But anyways, enough with RxJS. Let's continue with the rest of our tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and let's see if we get our console.log. Alright, so it looks like we got an error from our service. So status okay, unexpected token, and alright. So a server, just to show that this is all working, let's go ahead and log something. Say request coming in. We got moment coming in. Let's just do that. And let's go over here, refresh. So we do that request. Alright, so this is just the Unix timestamp. Let's make this a little easier to see. So we'll do the month, the day, year, the hour, minute, second. Moment is very nice. Working with dates in JavaScript are not too fun, but when you have moment, it makes it a lot easier. Hey, so that looks a little bit better. Normally you wouldn't do a timestamp like that for logging, but hey, that's just what I'm gonna go with right now. But you can see that request is coming in here. I'm just not sure why. Let's see if we change this to a JSON instead. Say message. See if that does any better. Yep. Yeah, normally when you send something back from the server, it's going to be either a JSON or an array. It's not just going to be a random string. So that works a lot better. So let's go ahead and remove that. And we'll keep this going here. But yep, this is the first step in this episode. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup. And we're just testing out our API endpoint. Now let's go ahead and add this environment variable in here too. But instead of it being localhost, ours would be CodingWithCourt.com. And it won't be, we don't need a port, but we will need /API because that's how we set up our configuration. Last but not least, let's go ahead and add everything. Again, I am working on the main branch, and I really shouldn't be, but actually, let's go ahead and fix that now. So, normally, when you're working on a development team, especially if you're working on a development team, you're not going to be working on the main branch like this, or you shouldn't be at least. So let's go ahead and create an issue here. I want to set up test API to Mabel server. Assign that to myself. This is a enhancement. This is for our initial release. So description. Create a user service. Very basic. Such a basic issue. So let's go back in here and let's do this properly. So normally I would have already checked out of a branch, but let's go ahead and check out of our main branch. We're going to create a new branch here. I'm going to call it feature test API endpoints. And the reason I use feature is because this is a new feature. So if it was, for example, let's say a bug fix, I would do something like bug fix test API endpoints or hot fix or just things like that. But I normally have all my features start with feature, all my bugs start with bug fix or bug. It just depends on what your development team is going for. But let's go ahead and add this. Creating user service and a test API endpoint. Let's go ahead and push that. Now this branch does not exist on GitHub. That's why it's asking me to type in this command here. Because I created it locally, but it doesn't exist on GitHub yet. Let's go ahead and git push that. Alright, so the remote branch was just created. And GitHub is already telling me like, hey, there's a new branch that's different from main. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, normally I keep my pull request names as the same as the branch that I was working on. So in my case, feature test API endpoints. Now I have no one to review my code, so I'll just leave that blank. But this is a enhancement description. So I've added a user service and a test function to hit a route on Mabel. Let's go ahead and create that pull request. We'll connect this to our project, and let's also link our issue here. So this is all part of DevOps. Programming is very important, but so is DevOps. If you don't organize your projects in this way, then it's very difficult to see how the code has changed. And what's nice about this is if this was a big pull request, I can include like test routes to use, some test data. I could be more specific about what's going on here, and somebody could come in here and click this link, this issue here, and they can see, okay, well, what was I assigned? But we're gonna go ahead and move this to review in progress, and same thing here. Now, we don't have any continuous integration set up or a pipeline, but normally what you would do is you would come in here and you would go line by line and see if there's anything here that you don't like. If you were reviewing somebody's code, and then you can come in here and say, oh, hey, with these lines, like on line 16, there's a typo or whatever, right? You can just put whatever you want, and then somebody would be able to, the person that is managing this pull request, the one that has done the writing for it, can come in and fix it. But everything I did is very simple. There's not a lot of changes going on here. I'm satisfied with my code. I have nobody to review it, so I'm going to go ahead and merge it. Okay, so everything's merged. It's telling me I can delete this branch. And now if I go back in my project, you can see here that a task was completed, and I also have this pull request here that was completed. So it keeps everything organized. I won't go through this every time with you guys, but I will as much as I can because DevOps is very important. And you can see who did what and just everything like that. It's very good practice to have. Now, I do need to change, I also need to do the same thing here, but since it's just one line, I'm going to leave it the way it is and I'll come back to that later. But let's go ahead and get started with our other things on our to-do list. But let me go ahead and double check what that was and we'll get started in just a second. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna connect our Express server to our MongoDB on Atlas. Let me go ahead and full screen that. All right, so let's go ahead and check out of a new branch. Let's go ahead and follow good programming guidelines. So this is gonna be a new feature, and I'm gonna call this initial. Let's go ahead and just do MongoDB setup. All right. Now we already have Mongoose installed, so we're good there. But let me go ahead and open up our Atlas. Okay, so I'm here on the Atlas. Here's my cluster, cluster 0. Let's go ahead and connect to it. So we want to connect with our application. And so here is a example for Node.js, but we have Mongoose. So let's go ahead and check out their documentation to see how we can do that. Alright, so it looks like this is how we would do it with Mongoose. And guys, as I mentioned before, when I make these videos, they're kind of on demand. I don't want to plan these out because I want you guys to see what it's really like being a developer and everything. So we're going to do this together and you'll see me pulling up documentation and things like that. But let's go ahead and continue with this. So let us go in here and I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it config. And inside of config, let's go ahead and create a new file. I'll call it dbcon.js. And this is going to be our database connection. But let's go ahead and get Mongoose in here. Oh, whoops. Let's get Mongoose. And let's go back to, I'm going to close some of these tabs. Let's go back to our documentation on Mongoose. I'm going to copy this. We won't need this for now, but this is our connection. Now, obviously this address doesn't exist for us, so we need to come into here. Okay, so I think before we can do this, we're going to have to create a user for our cluster. So let's go to our database access. So it looks like I already have an administrator here that can do anything it wants to my different collections. I'm gonna go ahead and add a new user so you guys can go through it with me, but I'll actually be using this one instead. But let's go ahead and do this. So, whoops. So in here you would type, random person, and I would auto generate a code here. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Let's auto generate a code. Let's just call this random or db admin. This is a terrible name, by the way, don't do this. But dbadmin01. And here's my permissions. So I'll do read and write to any database. And let's go ahead and add the user, and you can see that it's here. Now I can start using it for my different applications. But if you come back in here, go to connect, you'll see that, oh, whoops, wrong place. But if you go to connect, application, you can see that this string here, this URI, this is what we're going to need. So I'm going to copy this. Let's go ahead and paste that. Okay, so here's our URI. Let me open up our .env.dist. But you can see there's username, password, and our cluster name. So these are variables, right? These are things that we're going to need to add to our .env.dist. So we have our database user, database password, and you can probably get away with making these shorter. So like db user, db password, and we have our cluster name. So we have db name and db cluster name, right? And so these are all new. Go ahead and go off screen. All right, so guys, I'm going to do this off screen because I want to keep my password protected. But what you'll do is you're going to go ahead and just look at the string, right? So we need our username, password, cluster name, and our database name. So go ahead and fill that information out. I'm going to do it off camera, and as soon as I'm done, I'll be back with you guys. Alright guys, so I've already added my environment variables for these four here. Just make sure to fill out the username, password. Now for the database name, it can be anything. So for me, just MabelDB. I didn't go and create a database or anything like that on Atlas. It should already do that whenever we try to connect to it. So I'm using inline with the strings again. And so the order is DB, and I'm noticing some things I was missing here, but so we're using process.env, and should still not work. Yeah, that's fine. But in here, I'm requiring this database connection here. Now I'm actually gonna rename this. I don't like database connection. I'll just call it DB. And in here, we'll go ahead and save that. So it's just our DB. Now I'm requiring this here, but the .env is already required at the top, so I don't have to put that in here. So these are already coming through, and that's not a problem. Now, in their documentation, which I've seemed to close, let me reopen that. We copy this code here, and it's giving us some issues. This await here. Now, I'm going to try to fix that by not using await. And we're just going to use a callback function here. And it looks like that callback function is just an error. And let's go ahead and space this out so I know what I'm doing. And come back here. Okay. Alright, so let's check to see if we have an error. If we do, we can say connection to Mongo DB failed, and we can do JSON.stringify our error. Whoops, error undefined, and 2 for spacing. And we'll just return here. I could just do an else here, but I don't want to add any more scoping than I need to. So this is successful. Let's say successfully connected to MongoDB. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. So we're seeing, okay, so looks like we have successfully connected to it. There was no error here. I'm kind of wondering where that undefined is coming from. Because the only, so console.log. It's because I'm, okay, let's get rid of that. But, look, guys, we've finally connected to our database here. And I think we should be good here. Let's go ahead and export Mongoose here. But yeah, this all looks good to me. We don't really need this anymore. This const, we don't have to assign it to anything. And attempt to connect to database. All right, that all looks good to me. Later on, we can come back and add some logic to where if we start our server and it doesn't connect, we can attempt it a couple times before we just give up. But yep, looks like our connections worked. So the next part for our tutorial is moving on to creating our model. But before we do that, let's go ahead and finish up with our version control. So git add dot, I'm just saying with git add dot, you have to tell git like what files you're going to be committing. So the git add dot just says, hey, everything in this directory, and I'm realizing I need to go out one, but if I say git add dot, now notice what will happen here. It goes from changes to stage changes. So now when I write my message, it'll commit these. So I'll say git commit m for message. And we'll say initial. Actually, we'll say connecting to MongoDB Atlas. And we'll go ahead and git push that. Again, this branch isn't on there, so we'll have to go ahead and copy this, paste. Give it a second. All right. Now, I could go to GitHub and do a pull request and merge this to master, but I'm going to go ahead and stay on this branch until we get our model set up. But until then, we'll continue with this branch. All right, so I had just completed this video earlier today, and I was going over the footage, and for the majority of it, about 30 minutes of it, my audio seems to be really messed up, which is very unfortunate because I did cover the CRUD operations with the user model that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, and I also was able to connect to our Mongo database and everything like that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create another model, and we're just going to go off of that one instead of this user model here, because I kept mentioning in my previous recording that all of this is going to change when we add authentication. Because right now it doesn't have any authentication, which it's kind of useless at this point. So I would like to use a better example. Now, just to kind of quickly go over some of this stuff, this is what our database connection looks like. We have here's our URI, which is just a string. And just a reminder, because I'm not sure how much of the video is affected by all this, so I might end up having to redo the majority of this. But let me go ahead and get into my account and we'll go from there. How you get this string over here is you click on connect. Now, you will have to have a database user already set up, and if you haven't already, whenever you click on this, it'll ask you to do so. The first user you create on every Atlas cluster is the Atlas admin, which basically means they can do anything, that user can do anything they want to in any of your collections on this cluster. So go ahead and do that. Save the password and the user name that you decide. And back in our env.dist, you'll just go ahead and fill this information out. Now, my database name is MabelDB, but that database wasn't created until I came in here in our user route and actually registered somebody, which is our create operation. So you don't have to create the database manually. It'll already do it for you if it doesn't exist. Anyways, so if you come in here, connect with your application, all I did was copy this string and I replaced this information with the correct information from our environment variables. So I hope all of that makes sense. And if anybody needs any help, feel free to post a comment down below or email me and I'll do my best to help you all out. And again, I apologize for that audio issue. I'm not really sure what happened, but let's go ahead and run our development. Okay, so development's running. And like I said, let's go ahead, instead of creating a user schema, we're going to create a different collection, which is basically a table, but NoSQL has, different terminology for that kind of stuff. So we're going to go ahead and go into our models directory. And just so everybody knows, this is how I keep everything organized. I put my collections or models in here, which I kind of use that term interchangeably. So I'm going to create a new file and I'm going to call it product. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So we're going to require Mongoose. I mentioned, I believe in the first episode, that Mongoose is a ORM, and I believe that stands for Object Resource Management, something like that, but it's basically kind of like a median between our Mongo database and our code. So we're also going to have something called schema, and it's equal to mongoose.schema. Okay, so here's our product. Alright, so it's going to be a new schema. And down in here, we need to export this product so we can see it whenever we require this file and different files in our project. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say mongoose.model. Now I have to give this a name, and it's just going to be, this is basically your collection name. So mine's just going to be product. And then I put my schema here. Alright. Now, I don't need to put an ID because that's already auto-generated for me. So we'll go ahead and do name, and this will be type string. And whoops, this is required. Every product needs to have a name. And I'm also going to make this, I'm going to make this a unique identifier. Let me just double check that I did that right. Yep. Okay, so I'm making my product name unique because I don't want two different products with the same name. And I might change that later. I haven't gotten into too much e-commerce stuff, but we'll go ahead and do name, maybe quantity. And again, this might not be fields that I'll need. I'm just trying to come up with it as I go. Let's make this required true, and let's say the default value for this is 0. And let's go ahead and do description. Again, this is type string. I'm not going to make description required. Could even do something like department. So where is it coming from? Call this string. Maybe it can have multiple departments it comes from. And then inside of here, I'm going to use something called enum. And all an enum is for Mongo is that it solidifies what values are possible. So if I say technology in here, whenever I make a record, whenever I make a document in this collection for department, I can use technology. So I put in here what I can use. So we have technology, maybe entertainment, outdoor, hardware, and so on and so forth. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that. And let's do other. And I'll make the default other. So as I said, this enum will make sure that I can only use these 5 different strings as the value here, but because I have string and these array brackets here, that means I can have multiple of these, which is nice. But I'm going to go ahead and leave the product schema this way. I think this is some good enough content for products for now. And let's go back a directory. Alright, so you can see here that I have a folder called routes, and this is where I put all of my routes. You can put all of your routes in here, but it'll become very difficult to see eventually because you'll have a lot of code in here and everything. And I've also added a universal error handler. So if you'd like to implement this, go ahead and pause the video and copy this code here. But basically, anytime there's an error that's thrown, it'll come here if I use next, which, just to give you an example, in our user route that we made earlier, so in here, if our request.body.email doesn't exist, or the request.body.password doesn't exist, then I throw a new error or I'm sorry, I don't throw it. I create a new error and I pass that to next. And so what next does is it'll pass whatever I give it to the next layer within our routing. And so because this is an error, this error handler will be called here. So I hope that makes sense, but later on we'll do more complicated logging, because right now all the logging we have just shows up on the terminal instead of a error.log file, which is what I prefer. Anyways, enough talking. Let's continue with the code. So we're going to go into our routes. I'm going to create a product route. Normally with my routes, I go off of what collection I'm working with. So let's require Express. And let's do our router. I believe that's a function. Let's double check. Yep. Cool. Okay. Now let's go ahead and export our router so that whenever we require this file in our server.js file, we'll all be able to, it'll be available. Okay. So let's go ahead and quickly do our CRUD operations. We'll go ahead and start with get. Did I do that order right? Let me check. Yep. Alright. Yeah, array brackets again. Don't know why I've been doing that. Okay. Now I'm going to require a parameter here. I'm going to call that ID. I'll leave this for later because we don't have any products right now. So there's no way to test this. But we can at least say, hey, you hit product get. Now this is our read. It's the R in CRUD. Let's do this in order. So post is for creating. And I just leave that blank because I'm not passing anything as a parameter. Oh, this is create product. So request res next array brackets again. And we'll do res.json. And for now, we'll just send the body back. Okay. Let's go ahead and just put the rest of these in here since we're already kind of just putting the foundation for everything down. All right. Just go ahead and copy this. Don't forget those semicolons. They're not necessary in JavaScript, but I always use semicolons. So this is updating a project, and finally this is deleting a product. Alright, just looking over this. Should be programs instead, because that's, with the way I have this set up, that's where that'll go. Let's get Postman going. I'll close out of these. Okay. So let's set this up. 3000. And my route's going to be API product. We'll leave it at that. Change this to post. Now this won't actually work because I haven't put it in our server file yet. So let's go ahead and add our routes. Okay, so this is the parent route that I'm putting with the way that I'm doing this. So I'm saying /API/product, and then I'm going to require our product route here. I'm sorry, our product file that we were just working on. Now the reason why I do it like this is so that I don't have to include this route every time I create a new one here. So this will read API product ID and so on and so forth. And so API product with nothing preceding is our create product route. Now none of these routes are protected, so technically anybody could create a product. So later on, when we have authentication set up, we can restrict that to people that are logged in and have the right permissions to do that kind of thing. But let's go ahead and send a request and include some information here. So we need our name. Let's just call this a baseball. And for our description, it's awesome. And now that I'm thinking about it, if I'm going to do baseball, we need one for sports. And save that. So for our department, let's say sports and outdoor. Okay, we'll go ahead and send. So we can see that we've gotten a successful reply back from our server. It just sent the body back to us. And we can all see that here with this res.json. But let's actually go ahead and create a product. So the way I'm going to do that is I first need to include my product collection in here. And I do that by going to our models and including our product here. Now, I don't really need to add validation for our data because what we're going to do is we're going to say product dot save. Oh wait, actually we're going to do constant product. So we'll say product and we just pass in the request.body. So let's go ahead and send back the product that we just created. Alright, so you can see a product was created. Now that doesn't mean that it's in our database. So if we go ahead and look at our collections, you'll see that there's nothing in here. And the reason there's nothing in here is because I only created the product, I didn't save it to our database. So the way I do that is I say product.save. Product.save. Why am I going blank here? Ah, okay. So I was right. But it needs to be new. So product.save. I apologize if my dogs start barking, but so this product.save is a asynchronous function, which is why I'm using .then. I went ahead and just closed my door. But so we'll just send back the result of our product. All right. Now, the reason I said we don't really need any validation checks for our data is because in here, when you're working with promises and JavaScript, which is asynchronous functions, you have .then, .catch, and I think you also have .finally. Yep. But so .then is for a successful return, and .catch is whenever there's any errors. So what we're going to do is we're going to say next error. So if there's an error, we send that error information over to our universal error handler function. So we log the stack trace for the error, but whenever an error is thrown, we don't let the user know what happened. We just return a status of 500 and say, hey, something broke. The reason I prefer to do that is because because let's say there's a malicious user that's hitting our server, I don't want them to let them know that what they were trying to do broke my database, because this error would most likely contain something from MongoDB, and I want to keep my stack, especially the database, as private as possible. I don't want to return like any SQL or MongoDB errors to the client side. So that's why having this error handler is nice. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's create our first product. All right, so it looks like our product was created. And when we go and check in our database, you can see that it was created here. Now, one thing I'm noticing just by looking at this, and you can see here too, like we have our sports and outdoor, our departments working. I would like to add a timestamp to this. Normally, the things that I do at my job, we're normally working with lots of data that has something to do with geospatial information or just data collection in general. So we almost always have timestamps for our stuff. So if I go ahead and save that, now when I send this, it's going to break because I already have a product in there with the name baseball. So you can see that the response from the server is 500, which is that's the status, which is internal server error, and the message is something broke. Now when we look at the stack trace, you can see that it says duplicate key error, and that's because I added this unique here. So what I can do to kind of go around that is I can say basketball instead. So I've sent that, and you can now see that our created at and updated at timestamp is there, which is perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. But so this is the first operation that we need, and that's create. Now everything else will look something similar to this. So in here, what I want to do is, now I could just do something like this instead of doing a validation check here, but I want you guys to see what a validation check would look like. So I can come in here and say if request.params.id does not exist, so it's null or undefined, then what I can do is I can say next, new error, ID is null or undefined, cannot find a product with no ID. And I'll hit return. The reason I add this return here is because next does not end your code execution. So if this return wasn't here and I had a res.json here, then it'll go to next, but the code will still execute. I'll show you what that looks like, but before I do that, let's go ahead and save this, and I'll call this create a product. And so that saves into this request folder here. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to change this to get, and we're going to have a param here, and I'm going to copy. Looks like I can't copy that. Do I? Yep. Just copy that there. Put that value there. When I hit send, you'll notice that I still got to return a response. Okay, so that's because I actually put an ID. But let me take this out. That's my bad. Let me take this out though. Hit send. So I get a 404 for not found. Ah, okay. That's because the ID, because I have to have that ID there in order for that to work. So that's my mistake. We don't need any of this. It's not necessary. But the whole point is, let's say if you had additional validation that you'd like to do before you continue your code, do something like this. You could also remove this return and do else. But to me, that makes your code more complicated because you've included an extra scope. And, if you need further validation after that, it'll just get, very, very extended. So I'm all about making my life easier, not harder. So let's remove that. Now this is fairly simple. All we need to do here is say product.find by ID. And in here I just put my ID. Again, going with the .then and .catch. Apologize if you hear my dogs. Alright, so here's our result. And we'll send back our product. Once again, these array brackets. I don't know what's going on. It's been like this for weeks. Alright, so let's see if we retrieve our product. Looks like we have an error somewhere. Okay, product is not defined, and that's because this is result. Actually, now that I think about it, product is a better name instead of just result. And this will only ever return one product because that ID is unique. Alrighty. Now what happens if I try to get something that doesn't exist? Get something broke. Okay. Whoops. I think that was just one. Yep. Alright. So that all works out for me. Now if you were going to, you don't have to use find by ID. In my case, I'm looking with ID. But if I were to use name, for example, to search by, then I would use find. But yeah, I can get into that kind of stuff later. But for now, I just want to stick with the basic. Here's our CRUD operations. So for in here, we still need the ID. And we'll call product dot. I'm trying to remember what function I used earlier. Could use find by ID and update. I don't think I used that. Yeah, I used update 1, but should work the same. So let's go ahead and pass that ID. And for us, this will be the body. But and the body is just a JSON object, right? So it's our dot then dot catch error. Should notice a pattern here with some of this stuff repeating. And you can use async instead of dot then and dot catch, but I'm just going to stick with dot then dot catch. Normally I don't, but in this case I will. So let's console.log our result, and we'll return this. And everything compiled. Down here, let's save this. Get a product. This is just getting one product. This is by ID. Alright. Copy this. Also copy this. Now we change this to put. So again, create, use post, get, use get for read. For update, use put, and for delete, use delete. Whoops. Okay. So in our body, how about we change our name to baseball bat. I believe I need to put these quotes here. And this needs to be a JSON. So let's go ahead and see if that updates. Okay, something broke. ID is not defined. And that's absolutely correct. We need params.id. Let's go ahead and try that again. So we have our put. Doesn't look like it did anything. Give me 1 second to see what went wrong. Okay, let's go ahead and look up an example of how to use this function. Find by ID and update. And no hyperlink. Where are you at? So okay, so by default it returns the document as it was before update was applied. So there's a good chance that okay, so it did get updated. It just wasn't returned that way. So in here, if I say pink baseball bat, okay, so that returned baseball bat, but if I search, we can see here that pink baseball bat was changed here. if you set new is equal to true, we'll instead give you object after update was applied. So that's what I'm going to do. So is this where I put my options? Yep. And I'm going to say new is true. So let's change this to gray baseball bat. Hit send, and now it returns the new product. Now I can just leave this the way it is, and I think I will, because the status of 200 is returned, so the client side will know that this was successful. Now let's say, so one thing we should all do as developers is, I could just stop testing this route here, but I just thought of a use case that might be interesting. What if because I have two records here, I have baseball and pink baseball bat. I want to see what happens if, did that? No, okay. I want to see what happens if I try to update this to have the same name as this product here. Now it should, in theory, cause an error. So we'll see what happens. But as developers, we should try to find these use cases, and we should try to stress test our code as much as possible to see what happens. And I think it did update it. Okay, but that's because I have a capital B instead of I should have just hit find. Yeah, it's because I have a capital B instead of a lowercase one. So let's do baseball. Yep, something broke. And it's because of that duplicate key error. But the server is still running. The code went into here. Everything was logged the way it should have. And the error message from MongoDB was hidden. So that's what we're going for. Let's go ahead and finish up our last CRUD operation, and we'll call this video done. Okay, so in here, let's remove this, and we're going to say product.delete. Let's do find by ID and delete, because again, I am going by the IDs. And the reason I'm choosing to do ID instead of writing out the filter and doing find and delete or whatever the other functions are is because I'm assuming that searching by this ID is much faster than other fields. And that's usually the case for databases and things like that. Because that underscore ID uniquely identifies that row or that document, since we're working with MongoDB. But we're going to send this error to our error handler. And inside of here, we're going to have the result of that delete. And we'll just send it back so I can look at it and see what it is. And we'll let's go ahead and save this. Update product by ID. Our last CRUD operation for products, delete. And I'm going to copy that ID. And if everything works, it should be deleted. Alright, now I'm assuming that find by ID and delete will just return the document. Let's see what kind of options we have here. Yeah, so we got new in here. Let's go ahead and check out their documentation and see what that function does. So find by ID and delete. Okay, so it's just shorthand for find one and delete. It does the same thing. Now, what options are available? I'm just gonna leave this blank. But so it returns a product that is deleted. So what happens if it doesn't exist? We get something broke. Cast the object failed. All right. Now what if I leave that one there? Do I get the same error? Okay, so I needed to save that because that new was breaking it. Let's try this again. And I just get null instead. All right. So in here, whenever I deleted a user, I did check to see how many was deleted. And I did return an error message. I did return an error. But in this case, okay, we'll do the same thing just so the front end knows. So if not result, do next, new error, cannot find product with ID, and I'm going to be using the tildes because I like to use inline for building my strings. Okay, and instead of doing a return, I'll just do an else because they're just one line. Alright, so now I should still get the same thing, but I'll get a different error. Well, actually, it'll return an error instead of status 200. Alright, so something broke. Yep, cannot find product with ID. Do that colon here. Okay, but I think this kind of wraps up what I wanted to do. Again, I apologize for my audio breaking. Don't know why that happened. It didn't break. It just had really weird background noises. And I definitely don't want to hurt anybody's ears. So, despite losing all that content, we'll go ahead and push forward. Now, I'm going to end this video. But before I do that, let's finish up our DevOps. As I mentioned beforehand in my previous videos, I'm going to be going every step of the way with you guys. Cut nothing out, which is probably why these videos are going to be longer than your average tutorial videos. So, added new product collection and CRUD operations for products. And let's push that. And let me navigate to our GitHub page. Alright, so let's cover just very briefly some DevOps stuff. So I'm going to create a new issue here. I'm going to call it create product collection with CRUD operations. Now, normally, if I was a team lead, for example, I'd be putting a huge description here saying exactly what to do or any other things that I could think of. Now, earlier I did create a project, just like how I did with Artemis, our Angular project in the first episode. But unfortunately, like I said, that audio really messed me up. Now, technically I shouldn't be in this branch. I should have a new branch. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's follow good guidelines. So feature product products product collection. Okay, and so with my branches, I normally like to have a preceding name. So if they're new features, they'll say features, feature. If they're an epic branch where I'm going to be doing a lot of pushing to, it'll say epic slash. If it's a bug fix, it'll say bug fix slash. So it's important that you give good names to your branches. But all I have to do is git push here. I know that my GitHub repositories are private, but if you all want to look at this code, because I did spend about an hour with this section over here, although a majority of this will be rewritten because we're going to be adding authentication. I'm wanting to do that for our next video, but if you guys have any other things you want me to cover instead of that, let me know, because I know we haven't gotten into front end stuff yet, but it's important to have this full stack connection set up, because now we can communicate with our front end. Anyways, let's go ahead and do this pull request here. Yep, that'll be on the master, and normally I use the name of the branch as my pull request name. Now I have nobody to review my code, so that's blank project. Normally I put a description, but I'm leaving that blank just to keep the video short. Let's link this issue. Alright, and then if we go ahead and look in projects, you can see that things are progressing. Could even move that over to in progress. But let's go ahead and merge this pull request. Alright, go back to projects, and they should be moved to done. And so it's really nice doing this with GitHub, because you can see how your project has progressed, over the time of your development with it. But I think this is a good place for us to stop at. Again, I apologize for the audio issues. I'll be looking into that and possibly getting a new microphone. Maybe it was my headset that broke. But anyways, guys, it's been a pleasure hanging out with all of you. If this video helped you in any way, or you enjoyed the content, please like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And as always, feel free to email me with any feedback. You guys are awesome. I'll see you all later.